Thank you all for joining us for our new monthly webinar series. I'm Erin Hale with the New Hampshire Food Alliance. The Food Alliance is an umbrella network that collaborates with hundreds of food system professionals around New Hampshire to support the emerging local food economy. We started this webinar series to highlight the food system work already underway throughout the state and to create a space where network partners from every region of the state can connect. Before we get started talking with Justin, we want to introduce you to Zoom and how to use the various features to communicate with us during the webinar. So though we'll be muting everyone during the presentation, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar by using Zoom's chat function. To use chat, just click on the chat icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. A new window will pop up where you can type your questions. You'll have the opportunity at the end to ask questions or share updates verbally after our discussion is done. Can everybody see the chat function? You can practice if you want, just to make sure. Okay, if you're having any difficulties with Zoom, please type your concern in the chat box, or you can email me, erin.hale@unh.edu. Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to hear from Justin Monroe from Grow Nashua about the Nashua Food Council. Thanks for being here today, Justin.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for having us. So thank you for joining everyone that's here, which is somewhat early morning on a Monday. So I appreciate everyone coming out to learn a little bit more about what we've been up to in Nashua. So I am the executive director for an organization called Grow Nashua. We are an organization that's providing community outreach programs that allow our participants the opportunities and spaces to grow their own food, to learn how to cook their own food, as well as now, through this Food Council, a way to advocate for our local food system. So up here we have one community up here because we are literally a collection of people, city residents and organizational leaders, city municipality members that are also participating here. So it's just a collection of everybody. It's really a good place where we can all have our voice shared. And that's been great because we have such a collection of input. And when we do have our meetings and we're coming into the same place at the same time, it makes it easier to get things done because we have so many different voices in the room, people that are participating. So you'll notice the word ecological health at the top of this screen here. And that seems to kind of sit at the core of what we're doing. The word ecology, Jennifer, if you want to switch to the next slide, has the definition on it. And when you look at the word ecology, the definition is the branch of biology that deals with the relations of organisms to one another and their physical surroundings. I like that because it can apply to food. It can apply to a city as a whole. It can really apply to anything. And when you think about it as food, to kind of throw out an analogy of using a tomato plant, for example, because a lot of people have probably had experience at one time or another trying to grow a tomato plant to varying degrees of success. And you know that if you took a tomato plant and you stuck it in any spot in the city, that tomato plant would probably, with a little bit of luck, it would probably stay alive if no one was tending to it and it really had a kind of was living in a place of scarcity where it just kind of had to fend for itself. At the end of the season, there might be maybe 3 or 4 tomatoes that finally made their way out. If they were lucky enough, for the flowers to have been pollinated, and you end up with a couple tomatoes. And those tomatoes are probably going to be a little less red. They're going to be a little less tasty. The greens of the plant, the plant probably doesn't make it very tall, but it survived and it produced. It did what it needed to do. And if you didn't know any better, you'd probably say, hey, that was pretty good. I grew a tomato plant. I didn't have to do anything to it. I barely watered it. I didn't tend to it much at all. And it gave me 3 or 4 tomatoes. You can kind of picture that in your mind. You know, the tomato plant's probably a little over knee high. Alternately, if you take a tomato plant that has an abundance of input and care, that tomato plant is flourishing and it's growing, especially if you think of a cherry tomato plant, which is kind of the picture I had in my mind here. That's going to grow as high as you'll allow it and that you'll stake it, and this thing will just get huge and it'll keep growing. And then you're going to also have an abundance of cherry tomatoes out of that one plant, and they're going to be delicious. They're not going to be that instance of the first one. And the reason why I bring that analogy up is because I think that our communities need a similar level of attention as we kind of transition out of this feeling of scarcity and into a feeling of more abundance. There's those 2 tomato plants, the first one struggled, the second one flourished, and it flourished without a ton of, anybody who's grown a tomato plant before, it flourished without a ton of extra inputs. And the cool thing about the way that the Food Council has been organized is that we have a lot of different people contributing on their own. And so collectively, we together can put in that time to nourish that and make our whole collective impact be stronger because we're working together rather than just working alone. So this title of Food Council, it is literally just a title. It has food in it and it has council in it, but the people that are making up this group are what matters. And when we jump in a couple slides into the how-tos, it'll kind of become more clear why looking at your one community as a whole is important, especially with the understanding that the decisions that one of us make quite often affect someone else in the system. So the picture in the next slide will show kind of this interconnectedness of us all. You can kind of picture yourself as any one of these dots. So if you were the blue dot, you're in there, you're connected, you have your network of people that you're connected to, and someone else is the black dot, they have their network. Your networks may overlap a little bit, and then eventually you could connect into maybe with that red dot that's up at the top, and through a series of connections. It's kind of like that game, 3 degrees, I think it's called 7 degrees or 3 degrees of separation with Kevin Bacon. It's like kind of like that game, like where we're connected in very few steps, especially in our local community, to each other. So that's important to keep in mind. This note here, this definition, social determinants of health, is a term that you might be familiar with. And as you read it, you'll notice that it talks about factors like socioeconomic status, education, physical environment, employment, social support networks, as well as access to healthcare. It doesn't mention food, but in any one of those instances, food falls into that equation. In any of those instances, it can sit in any of those places. And food acts as a really nice common denominator that people can really unite around. And it's another important point when you're thinking about a food council and why a food council might be important, and why would I want to be involved in a food council. Everyone has their own different reasons why food's important to them, and everyone has their own passions about food. Maybe it's on the cooking side of things. Maybe it's on the food equity side of things. And maybe it's somewhere in between that. But the neat part about having this food council is that you can be inclusive of a lot of different people's interests. So let's see, if I wanted to, and so the last thing I did want to say is when you're thinking about other people's interests, is that's you want to light that spark. So when we do jump into some of these how-tos, finding that interest of people and having that spark be lit and have them get excited about something that matters to them is important. And this food council provides a space for people to kind of come in and say what's important to them, and then as a group together, we can kind of move that forward. So we can switch to the next slide. I was thinking of I should have found a little sound from Fisher Price. I'm remembering as a kid, I used to have that Fisher Price read-along book. It had the record and it had the the books, and each page it would ding in between. I was thinking that would have been good as a little sound effect for the presentation today. So this quote here is by a famous economic theorist, Jane Jacobs. I'll give you a second to read that. I like this quote when you're thinking about cities. So again, this is about thinking about our city as a whole, so thinking about your community as a whole, thinking about every single unique voice within our community and the things that affect them, that may affect you, the things that affect them and you that neither of you know about. So there's two inputs. Somebody maybe at the city has one thought about how food should be, and maybe someone who is over at our soup kitchen has another opinion about what they think food should be. And maybe there's another person who is dealing with food insecurity that has another opinion. And so having this food council is something where you can start to have all those voices come into the same place at the same time. So a good story about this, we recently had one of our meetings, and someone at the meeting had expressed, they were talking about if you live in a place, a food desert, and you do not have access to a car, and you have to go get groceries, and you have 3 or 4 kids. If you're going to go to the grocery store, you can Uber, you could take a bus, you could take a taxi. Each of those has their kind of limits. They all cost money, or you can walk. And so if you do choose to walk, you can imagine the amount of time that it takes to get those groceries, especially if one of your kids is maybe only 4, and you're talking about kids that are 4 are looking at the sky most of the time and not really keeping up with the group. So you can imagine how long it would take to go get your groceries. So someone had brought that up as an example and said, this is an experience that I have that we could think about. And someone else in the group said, well, what if we had, if the bus system kind of fails that instance, because you can only bring 2 bags of groceries on the bus and we're kind of falling short. What if we had a way where you could have just a single pickup system, a van or something that picked people up on a Saturday, drove them to Market Basket, our local grocery store, and allowed them to shop for an hour, and then brought them back to the same point. Like it could serve a neighborhood. You could kind of throw 3 or 4 families could all pile in the van together and go, and you would serve you'd be able to do that. And then there was another organization that was in the room that said, well, we happen to have vans that pick. This was the Boys and Girls Club that picked kids up during the week, but on the weekends we don't use those vans. So that was a great example of, we're in the same room, someone expressed a need, another person thought of the idea of, hey, what if there's a van and then we could just do this? And then a third person actually had vans and said, oh, well, so now we have all the pieces that exist. So now as a food council, we could say that, hey, this is a project that makes sense. It seems like the parts are all here. We just need to bring them together and find a volunteer or two to drive these vans on a Saturday for a couple hours. So that's a good example of kind of a story that shows the workings of a food council. So as we flip to this next slide here, kind of our theory stops, and this is where the work gets real. So if you're thinking about starting your own food council, in this section here, I don't know if people can talk or if they can only chat, but if you have questions as we're going, feel free to interact, because if you have a thought, a question about something, most likely someone else is kind of thinking the same thing too, and we can kind of dig into stuff. So map your community. So this starts with yourself. What's your interest, and where do you hope to go with this? So you're thinking about your reasons, kind of like I mentioned before. Are you interested in nutrition? Are you interested in cooking? Are you interested in growing your own food? Are you interested in, why are you getting involved? And that kind of can help, because it starts to, and this is a good exercise, whether it's doing with yourself or doing with another person that's interested, is to actually ask them, why are you doing this? Why are you interested? Why would you like to join? Because when you get into kind of looking at those, when you map your community and you look at your community resources, you're going to find that some people are already doing things. Some people are doing the same things, and you don't want that, because that's just a waste of energy and a waste of, it's not very efficient to do it that way. So when you map your community, you're looking at the resources, but you're also asking people, why do they do that? What's the purpose of that particular? They might, it might be the Salvation Army. They might have a food program, and then they might have classes that kind of support healthy eating or nutritious eating, or how to cook nutritiously on a budget, or whatever. They might have something that supports their food pantry work. But it's important to ask the people that run these organizations, what's in it for you? Like, what makes you, what drives you to do this type of work? And then at the same time, as you're doing this and you're mapping it, you're seeing who's doing what, and it kind of you start to see the energy that's available and the options that you have to do this type of work. And then that's kind of where the next step there, follow available energy. I don't know if the phrase is that water finds its, water kind of always finds its way. I know that I experienced that over the winter with water that made it from my backyard into my basement through the smallest little hole that we had in the foundation, because it was the easiest way for the water to go. And so it's a good example of it was an easy solution for the water to find its way. And whenever you're working within your community, if you can allow those easy paths to develop and support those paths, and you might find that as you start working on this, that there are a couple people that are kind of super enthusiastic about this. And if you can help support their interests, then that becomes, even if it's just one person, now it's two of you. And each of you may know another person, and then it soon becomes 4, and then it soon becomes 8. And that's what we've kind of seen with here in Nashua, is that we started on a round table with maybe 8 people.
Oh, hi everyone. It sounds like we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Justin, is your connection okay? All right, hold on, folks. We're gonna try to problem solve here for just a minute. Please bear with us.
Hey there, Justin, can you hear us?
Oh, yes. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
Okay, so you cut out there for just a little bit if you want to start back up.
I think I was maybe at the point where I was talking about following energies.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. It's weird to be on a call here where there's no like back and forth discussion to know whether I'm still on. So I'm sorry that I dropped off there. I think I was talking about following available energies, making sure that you are actually partnering with people who are also passionate about the work and supporting their passions as well as your passions. So those end up being, these are kind of your stakeholders as time goes by. These are the people that kind of you build out. It may start with just a few of you. I think I said that we started with maybe 8 people in a room, and then we slowly kind of expanded to 20 people at the second meeting, and then there were, I think, there were probably 20 people at the next meeting, but there were probably a dozen new people in each meeting. There's probably been a dozen new people and maybe a dozen people that have been continuously coming. So as time goes by, the word has kind of spread about what we're doing, and that we're actioning what we're looking at, and we're developing plans of how to kind of make an impact in our community. And so more people are stepping in and taking an interest and kind of following what we're doing, because the work that we do is also, it impacts the work that they do. So if an organization has some particular programs that are around food access, food insecurity, or nutrition, or even distribution, these are all things that are interesting to the players and the stakeholders in your town. And those are the people that end up making up your food council. So it's nothing terribly complicated. The one thing that I would say is important is initially when you're starting to do this work is to be involved in the community and volunteer wherever you can, to really try to get back to that mapping and understanding what your community is doing and what they're up to. It's a pretty important part of the work is to actually do some work on the ground so that you understand the needs of your community. And then, or actually, are there any questions? Nothing has come up. I don't see anything on the chat here, but so I'll keep going, I guess, unless there's a question on anybody's mind. Hone your skills, number 3. So this one has been key, and I know starting this, I did not have the skills to do this type of work, and so everybody's been to a meeting before where you go to the meeting and it just doesn't, it seems disorganized, or you seem to not really have a focus of what you're doing. It's not clear maybe why you're doing it, or why you're there. And so having some skills around running a meeting is a good idea to try to kind of track those down. There is a link that is I posted up on the website underneath at the bottom of the Food Council page that does have there is a facilitation training that's coming up that is with Welcoming New Hampshire. That's actually coming up, I think, on this Thursday. So if anybody's looking to kind of buff up on their facilitation skills, I would highly suggest that as an initial step before you really start to have meetings, is to kind of get some skills around how to run a meeting and how to get people involved, how to get people to network and really talk to each other at the meeting. Because a lot of times if it ends up being a meeting where you're just presenting, there's not a lot of opportunities for others to actually connect with each other. And when people can connect with each other, that's when kind of they start to do their own projects, their own interests kind of align. You've been in a meeting before where you've heard someone ask a question or someone speak, and you thought, wow, I want to meet that person after the meeting. And so you seek them out. And so those type of interactions are the ones where when you bring a meeting of 20 people together and 2 people sync up and they start talking after the meeting, now they're going to do some work together and their interests probably align. And so that's where we really start to be effective as an overall food council. And then another place where you can kind of hone your skills, if you look at, this is another link that I posted up on the site, the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. They are doing a ton of research nationally, a lot of organization for food council work. And their research database is extensive. So as you get going with this work, you'll need certain information on certain things, and their database is great for that because you can look into someone else that's done it. So you're not reinventing the wheel for, every time you have to figure out how to do the next step, or every time you want to pursue a particular interest with the group, you're not looking into recreating that wheel for yourself. Let's see, the other thing that I wanted to mention, I think I mentioned the facilitation skill that's coming up. UNH also has a community organizing, a couple events that are coming up. I put that link up on the site. So if you go to grownashua.org and you click on the outreach programs, it'll actually, on the food council page, you can see that. So those are there for you guys if you want to hone your skills. And then the last 2 kind of fall somewhat hand in hand. Trust is, you just trust in yourself, trust in your community, trust in the fact that there's an abundance of people and resources that are doing good things. A lot of times people don't know that there are other people doing good things. And I think that's unfortunate that we as a community operate in our own little bubbles a lot, and we don't really get out there and see that, I know in Nashua, I had no idea until I started doing this work a couple of years ago that we had so many awesome organizations doing good things for people, and the people that ran those organizations are awesome too, and I didn't know them either. So it's great to be able to get involved with your community and with other community leaders, and it really kind of just takes taking that first step and deciding what's important for you, why you'd want to get interested in this, why you'd want to do something about this, and then just reaching out. Go to a meeting. There's always city hall meetings that are happening. There's always little small groups that exist that might have some people there that are doing things related to your interest, and when you get to talking to them, you realize, oh, there's another person here that's doing this, and then it's really just aligning those resources. And as far as proceeding sincerely, I'd say as long as your interests are aligned and you're doing this for the right reasons and you're talking to people with sincerity, they can hear that in your voice and they can see the passion that you have for a particular topic, and that really translates into that sincerity that you can't really fake. So it's just one of those things where if you're passionate about something and you reach out to others, they'll see that and they'll be receptive to it, and they'll support in you in whatever way that they can, especially if it aligns with their interests. So that always comes back to when you're mapping your community, to really be asking those resources, why are you doing this? What's your mission? What's your objectives in this? So I'll try my ding. Ding. See how close that was to the old Fisher-Price reader. So this last quote I love. In case you're feeling low or doubtful, here's your reminder. We can do this. You, me, all of us. We can solve what we're facing. Your voice, your caring, and your presence matter deeply. let's focus on our vision of a kinder, more equitable world and choose to keep working together. I really like that quote. I think it speaks well to this type of work and any type of work in involving your community and doing something as a whole rather than just being in our own little bubbles that sometimes don't make it out to all connect together and see the full potential of the power of a community has. So I appreciate the time and thank you for allowing us this opportunity to share this information. New Hampshire Food Alliance, appreciate that.
Great, thank you so much, Justin. And so now we'd like to open it up and have people ask questions and have a bit of a conversation. So, so first of all, one way that you can do that is raising your hand. And if you can raise your hand in Zoom, then we can unmute you and you can actually speak verbally. So does everybody know how to do that? If you click up. Okay. So, okay, so a box will pop up if you click on the raise your hand, a box will pop up and click on the raise your hand icon. So that allows us to see who wants to share an update or who has a question to ask.
You can also type questions into the chat box.
Right. Okay. So while you're taking a minute just to figure out how to raise your hand, we just want to let you know we have okay. So we have questions. If you've got questions for Justin, also think about if you have other updates that you'd like to share or events that you'd like to promote with the other folks who are on the webinar right now. And if you have any questions about how to raise your hand, you can also type that into the chat function as well. And maybe while people are figuring that out, I have a couple questions for you, Justin, too. It was great to hear more about how the Food Council is developing. And it sounds like you were talking about how you've been doing a lot of the facilitating and organizing. Is it your organization, Grow Nashua, that's been getting the funding to help organize these meetings, and who's helping to fund the work?
Great. Yes. So currently, we started this basically with the original time that we started looking at this was through a recommendation of Stacy Purslow at UNH, because we were selected as a beacon community in 2016 or 15. And so a lot of our work had initially been focused on farm to school. And as we started working with farm to school and we started developing relationships with all those community partners, because a lot of community partners pair in with schools, we started to kind of see a need for a little bit of conversation around the different great things that were going around in town and how do we make sure that we're not duplicating anything. So Stacy had mentioned, she said, oh, take a look at, what this food councils are all about. And so we started to do a little bit of research, and then we had that small meeting to kind of gauge whether people would be interested in doing something along the lines of looking at our whole food system and everything that goes into it. And people were. So fortunately, we were able to initially utilize that initial funding that we had that we were sharing now we ended up sharing that with Farm to School. And then there was another grant that the Nashua Soup Kitchen inside of our community had received funding to actually start a food council. And so they have been able to kind of extend some additional startup money for us to be able to continue to kind of pull together resources and facilitate those meetings and really establish this as an entity in our city. So as of right now, there's myself, Acro Nashua, and then there's also Jessica Gorin, who is part of Gorin Public Health Consulting. And so the two of us together have kind of been the co-leads on facilitating and pulling together the pieces for the Food Council.
Great, thank you. And I know Jessica's on the webinar too. Jessica, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free to raise your hand. We can unmute you too if you want to say anything. Great. So it sounds like, do you know of any other food councils in New Hampshire, other communities that have been doing it, or were you looking at examples in other places?
Mostly other places. There are, some states, so New Hampshire does not have, that we know of, any other food councils. There is a food council that is quite successful up in Lewiston, Maine.
Okay.
That was one of the early ones that we kind of connected with and spoke with and learned from. Mm-hmm. And then we got tapped into the Johns Hopkins network, and that network is actually quite deep. They're really looking at organizing food councils at a national level.
Okay.
If you go to a state like North Carolina, though, I think somebody told me that they have more than 20 food councils.
Wow. Okay.
So when you get to that level, I think then you're talking about being able to collaborate from city to city.
Right.
So that could be an exciting thing as we kind of see an interest pop up in other places. If we as Nashua can do anything to help support another place that is, ideally you have cities kind of pop up very close to you, and then you really have probably some pretty significant impact when you have two cities next to each other or pretty close to each other. I could imagine that you could kind of start to share some resources and then really create some better efficiencies between cities.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, have you been talking with other folks in New Hampshire about?
No, this is our first time of,
Great.
We work with organizations in throughout the state, but our focus has been on kind of getting Nashua started and running and learning here before we're by no means experts. We're really just kind of, we're fortunate that Johns Hopkins has also kind of extended a hand out to us and said, we're excited that New Hampshire is starting a food council, and anything that we can do to support you, we will.
Great.
So that's been super.
So it looks like, Justin, we have a question from Rachel. What do you see as some specific organizational or missional attributes that create a food council as opposed to other types of food work organizations? Great question.
Gotcha. That's a good question. So let's see. If I would say when we're talking about food work organizations, Rachel, or do you mean like a food pantry, for example, that is looking at improving?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you, Rachel, just so if you wanna jump in, you're unmuted. If you wanna clarify, or you guys can have a little bit of a back and forth.
It sounds like she can't.
Oh, is she not able to?
Okay.
Oh, she's not in a place. Okay, no worries.
Erin, what do you think she's asking with that question? It sounded like maybe you picked up something that I'm not.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering, maybe partly it's focus, right? It looks like Jessica is raising her hand, so I'm going to unmute you if you want to jump in, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I was just reading Rachel's question here, and it sounds like, you know, she said, for example, agricultural commissions. Food council work is really broad versus very specific as to other types of food work organizations. So Justin mentioned the collective impact work is really important in our food council. It's really taking a look at the overall picture of what's going on in the city of Nashua and even the greater Nashua area, if you look at the surrounding towns, and saying, what are all of our resources out there? And then how can we bring all those resources together to improve food access, food distribution, food production, and create more equity in a community? The next step for our food council is to work on the policy part of it. So we may have people within our group working on policy. We may have people within our group working on programs. We may have people that are in our group working as liaisons, getting out to the community members and making sure that the community that we're serving realizes that there's programs out there to bring them more access to food. Or if they want to start a food business, they know how to get involved to start a food business. So it's really very broad-based. In our mission, this is not verbatim, I'm just going off the top of my head right now, but the mission of our food council is to, you know, become the #1 producer and distributor and provide nutritional education in the state, like to be the kind of model that we can replicate and then put out there as a statewide model.
Great. Thanks for that clarification, Jessica. Yeah, Haley, I see Haley says looking at it as the collaborative aspect. So rather than having one organization that's determining its own goals, that it's a really collaborative effort, it sounds like. Rachel has another question. Can you give an example of some specific policies your group is focused on at the moment?
Justin, you okay if I take this question?
Yeah,
or
absolutely. Yeah. Sure.
So on the policy side of things, we're actually just starting to evaluate our ability for policy change. However, and that's more at a statewide level. On the city level or town level, we're looking at, you know, how can we change policies within schools? How can we start to change policies within businesses and and how their employees are, you know, having access to food or how they participate in food. So there's the policy part of it that is within organizations, and we're at a level where we can start working on some of those policies, but we haven't started working on anything specific yet.
And the schools are kind of where we've had the most, because we've been working at the schools for a couple of years, the school is where we have the most traction. So the schools right now, we have a wellness committee that sets the wellness policy for the schools. So that particular avenue is something that we're looking at, as well as kind of getting the people that are on our Board of Education and our superintendent involved in the importance and the kind of the total impact, the return on investment for having something like Farm to School exist inside your community. That return on investment over time and the impact that those type of programs have on our overall health of our community is important. So having those conversations back up with the Board of Education and talking to the superintendent and having some wording built into the wellness policy that's specifically about farm to school work, for example, is something where that's looking at that. It's kind of closing the loop on that whole system there where you have the teachers and the students that you're teaching, but you have to make sure that you're also looking at that policy that exists that determines what they have time to teach and whether there's any sort of suggested activities for them to be teaching that are food related, getting the kids up to speed on the food system, our local food system.
Great. That's a really great example. I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about how getting a policy change like that implemented will happen maybe easier or more quickly with the Food Council as opposed to just with Farm to School or just with Grow Nashua?
Sure.
Yeah.
So when we have, the stage that we're at inside of our particular Food Council right now is we are at a stage where we've kind of looked at the activities that we want to take to achieve certain outcomes, and we have kind of three pillars of focus. They're on production, on distribution, and on nutrition education. So when we look at those different pillars and we think about the policy that needs to support those, one of the things that I think is everyone has varying levels of understanding is how to change policy, who to talk to, what the process is. So we're at the process of, there's an organization in the state called New Futures, and New Futures, we're hoping to have them come in the near future to teach us about how to do that. They have a person on their staff that actually used to work in the city of Nashua. So as we look at those three pillars, and our group is at the point where we are at our next meeting, we're going to be establishing committees, and then those individual committees can have their own action items and their own co-leaders inside of each committee to get some work done. And again, coming back to honing your skills, we have to also be providing people with opportunities to learn about how to do things in the city. We have some people from the city that participate on the Food Council, but as a good general, having some knowledge about this type of work is important to getting any policy changed, is really understanding the policy and the rules of the game before you really try to create policy.
Right. Great, thank you. Any other questions for Justin or Jessica? Well, thank you both so much. We want to, let's see. So yeah, we want to thank everybody for being here. We also want to give an opportunity for folks to share any updates or announcements from their own organizations before we say goodbye. If anybody wants to raise their hand or type in a message. Justin and Jessica, we've been trying to put in links to some of the great resources you've shared with us today. We are recording this webinar as well, so this will be online and available for other folks to listen to.
Sounds good.
And yeah, and and we actually have another webinar coming up next month. We've got from ATRA and NCAT, Intermediated Markets, What Farmers and Educators in New Hampshire Need to Know. That's going to be on April 23rd at 12 p.m. So again, on the New Hampshire Food Alliance website, you can register for that as well.
Sounds good. And I just posted the link there for at the bottom of that page.
Okay.
All the links that I mentioned are all in the same spot.
Okay, great. And we have a message here from David that the Souhegan Sustainability Fair is happening on April 14th, and he's posted a link for that. Thank you. And Daniel, I see you're raising your hand, so you're unmuted if you have an announcement, Daniel. Are you there, Daniel?
I double muted myself.
Oh,
Can you
okay.
hear me now?
We can hear you. Hi.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Pryal. Thank you, Jennifer, for giving us a plug for the webinar next month. I'll be doing that on intermediated markets. If anyone has specific questions that they want to make sure that I address in that webinar before next month, do shoot me an email. It's just danielp@ncat.org, N-C-A-T. But the reason why I'm actually grabbing a couple minutes right now is I just want everyone to give us a hand. We're going to be doing in June a training for military veterans to help them transition from military life into farming life. And applications are available right now for that. I'm putting the link there right now. ncat.org/armed-to-farm. Armed to Farm is our program. We're going to be training about 30 military veterans, and it's a cost-free program. The only cost that they're going to have is getting themselves to Troy, New Hampshire for a week-long training. So if you can help spread the word to any military veterans you know who might be interested in farming, we're looking to get as many applicants as possible. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing, Daniel. And we'll look forward to talking with you next month, too. Okay. Any other updates, events, questions? All right. Thank you all so much. Justin, thank you so much for the presentation.
Yes, our pleasure.
And again, to Jessica for jumping in there. We will look forward to talking to many of you all next month.
Sounds
All right,
good.
take
Thanks
care,
so much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
What's the trick?